Content warning. This episode contains graphic descriptions of wartime events, including intense situations, injuries, and death. Listener discretion is advised. Thank you for tuning in to another compelling episode of Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Today, we are not just sharing stories, we're sharing the experiences of a veteran who faced an extraordinary challenge about which he seldom spoke. Please subscribe now. Subscribing, downloading, and likes help amplify these voices, ensuring their stories reach those who need them most. Today, we are happy to be speaking with Bill Rowan, the son of Army Air Force veteran John Rowan, known to his friends as Jack. As you will learn, Bill is a veteran Marine. We are speaking here today from my hometown, overlooking the beautiful Mississippi River, Alton, Illinois. This is Diana Maul Halstead, the Kriegie's daughter, welcoming another legend of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Thank you, Bill, for taking the time to speak with me today about your dad.
Thank you, Diane.
First, let's talk about how we know each other.
Oh, yeah. Well, we know each other through my beautiful wife, Anne Monroe Rowan. I had the privilege of marrying her back in 2012. We met when we had adult children. Our children were already grown, and I never thought I'd meet anybody like that, but I did. She's a gem.
What happened that we knew we had a connection, you and me?
Well, I think it was at the reunion. It might have been the 20th reunion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we had a discussion that both of our fathers were prisoners of war, flyers during World War II.
And they just happened to be POWs.
Yeah.
Together.
Yes. My dad was in Stalag Luft 3. He was a prisoner for a total of 9 months. It was the last 2 months. They transferred him to Stalag Luft VII-A down in the south of Germany because they were trying to retain the most valuable, most highly trained prisoners, which of course were aviators at that time. So they went from Stalag Luft 3 to Stalag Luft VII-A, which was 4 times overpopulated. They just stuffed. There were 40,000 prisoners in Stalag Luft VII-A. It was designed for 10,000.
Unreal.
So people were sleeping in the open, in tents.
On the floor.
On the floor, wherever they could. They were lucky to have a floor to sleep on. The march, January 28th, 1945, was the most crucial moment because many men died. It was indeed a death march.
My dad was part of that. Well, because he was a POW in the same camp as your dad.
Right.
And he was a part of those marches. And one of my dad's crew actually died in the march.
There were dozens of men who froze to death.
Yeah, they weren't clothed properly. They didn't have shoes.
Yeah,
boots,
they were
anything.
given less than 24 hours. Were moving out because they could hear in the distance the Russian guns getting louder and louder and louder. The Wehrmacht and Hitler didn't want to give up these high-value prisoners.
Nope, they did not.
No.
They did not.
Mm-hmm.
And your dad was John Rowan.
Yes.
Okay. And
everybody knew him as Jack. He was Jack Rowan. My dad was Jack Rowan to his brothers and his sisters and his friends and his fellow officers.
He was a navigator.
Yes, he was.
He was on a B-17?
He was on a B-17.
Okay.
He was part of the 351st Bomb Group, which was a group within the 8th Air Force. They flew out of Polebrook, England. Like all of those bases was in Eastern England. Growing
up, what was his family dynamic?
They were very poor. He was the grandson of immigrants from Ireland, mostly from Ulster. His grandparents came from Tyrone, Roscommon, Leitrim up in the north. I believe only Tyrone is part of Ulster, Northern Ireland. They were all from there. They all escaped with Ireland barely with their lives. They showed up in New York and just took jobs as laborers and their sons were laborers, and their grandsons, their grandsons were laborers for a while, but my father went to City College. That's how he got into the ROTC in 1940. But the family, he had two sisters and two brothers. He was one of five. Had a challenge surviving childhood. There wasn't enough food. They were very skinny.
Here in the U.S.
Yeah, in Staten Island, New York, which is the most remote borough of New York City. It's an island just southeast of Manhattan. You have Manhattan Island, then the Liberty Island, where the Statue of Liberty is, and then Staten Island. It was known then as an Irish gangplank because they hadn't built the Verrazano Narrows Bridge yet. So it was mostly Irish immigrants and sons of immigrants. My grandfather, who I'm named for, both grandfathers, but this particular one, his father was William Rowan, as I am, William Rowan. And he worked as a laborer in the oil refineries across a narrow body of water called the Kilvan Cull, which separated Staten Island, New York from New Jersey, where all the refineries are. And he and his friends and his fellow workers would take a rowboat and they'd row across this horribly polluted body of water, this channel called the Kilvan Cull. Lots of Dutch names there. It was, filled with oil and pollutants and sewage, and he would take his lunch across in a bucket and work all day at a refinery. The family dynamic was such that Dad was the star. All of my aunts and uncles were bright people, but my father was brilliant. He spoke Latin. He started taking Latin in junior high school. He was a great writer.
He was.
Oh, yeah.
Well, he wrote the newsletter in my dad's book.
That's right.
That was real descriptive. I mean,
that was 1944 Christmas in Stalag Luft 3.
How do you put an uplift on being a POW? He did.
Yeah, he did.
He did. Even when he described the latrines.
He did. His father was a stern and abusive, an alcoholic. And his father used to raise his hands to his wife, my dad's mother, their mother. And he was, when he wasn't working, he was drinking. He was known as Buck Rowan, a man with heavy hands.
Wow.
A redhead. And he beat his kids. He beat his wife. And he was a brutal man. Never had a kind word for any of his children. Down at the pub, well, he bragged about Jack, my Jack, Jack, because my dad was a straight A student, well liked by his teachers, kind of, shy, retiring, but very bookish. In fact, his mother, my grandmother, Margaret Hughes Rowan, she cleaned houses and took in laundry in Staten Island. There was a wealthy neighborhood called Tote Hill. I think it's still an affluent neighborhood. And there was a physician who lived there who had this beautiful library of books and globes and scientific journals.
Wow.
And my grandmother knew he was a star academically. And she asked, Doctor, could my son come here and read your books? And he says, of course. And my dad went there a couple of times a week and just devoured everything he could. And it was like a supplement to his education. He really enjoyed that. And my mother, everybody recognized him as the star in the family. So all his brothers and sisters went into the service when World War II broke out, but they were all enlisted.
Yeah.
My father was the only officer. He joined the Army Air Corps, and he joined as a reserve officer trainee in 1940. He had just graduated from high school. He did his training in Texas and I think Oklahoma, but I don't know the bases. He went into pilot training in Texas. He didn't make it. He washed out of pilot school. It was no easy task to fly a B-17. He had the smarts, so they made him a navigator.
How old was he when he enlisted?
Let's see. When he went into the reserve officer training class, He was also attending Manhattan College. He was 18.
So he graduated from high school and then he enlisted in ROTC and did
Yes.
his college that way. Now, did he graduate from college and then go into active duty?
No,
Oh, okay.
no, he didn't. He was just attending Manhattan College, and he was activated before he graduated. I think maybe he had a year and a half of college before they made him an officer and sent him to flight school.
What rank did he have? You said he was an officer, but
Sure. He started as a second lieutenant when he went to flight school. First, he was an ROTC cadet, and then he was commissioned and promptly sent to flight school.
Yeah.
And I believe that was late 1941.
he served in the European theater.
Yes, he did. I don't have a lot of information about how he got there, but it was probably by ship, as most of them. As you may know, a lot of women pilots flew those B-17s from Massachusetts to Newfoundland, sometimes to Greenland, and then they landed them in England. They just had a
and
shuttle.
then they let a man come take
and then
over.
they let a man fly him in
Yeah.
combat missions. But he took a ship over, as did most servicemen, most flyers, most all armed servicemen. Took a ship over, and was stationed in Polbrook, England.
Do you know about his last mission?
I do. When they got there, there was quite an operational tempo right away, because he got there in, I believe it was early 1944. Yeah, I think it was early 1944, and they had been trained, and they did some practice flights, and then they started flying combat missions right away. Now, the combat missions, each flyer was assigned 22 combat missions, and then he could go home. But the losses were so heavy that they said, well, guys, now we got to make it 25. And losses continued to be frighteningly heavy. And so then they said, well, now it's got to be 27. Then finally, before his last mission, they made it 32, because they were just losing hundreds and hundreds of men every month, highly trained flyers, killed in action, POWs. Here's a little known fact: the divisional size unit that had more casualties than any other unit by far was the 8th Air Force. There was the 96, your father's group. My father's group was the 351st. And so the 8th Air Force had a higher percentage of casualties than the 1st Marine Division.
Wow.
Higher casualties than the 3rd Marine Division. Higher casualties than the Big Red One. They just had enormous casualties.
Wow.
And many of them POWs.
Yeah.
Many of them never came home.
Nope, they didn't.
Yeah.
So just to back up just a minute, where was he during Pearl Harbor?
Pearl
That
Harbor
was in
in
1941.
1941. He was in flight school.
Okay.
In Texas.
So he was training.
He was training in 1941.
But he wasn't over there in Hawaii at all.
No, he was not.
Okay, good.
He was training in Texas and getting ready to be assigned to the 8th Air Force.
It was his 30th mission, his last mission, or his
it was his 31st mission.
His next to the last mission.
His next to the last mission.
And his plane caught flak.
Yes. Not many people know this, but very few people made it to their last mission. Very few. The chances of making it through all your assigned missions, whether it was initially 22,
it's
25,
a lot of numbers.
27, it was 1 in 7.
Yeah.
Your chance of actually making it without being killed or captured or badly wounded. Staggering.
When his plane went down, do you know the date?
I believe it was August 6th, 1944. So he had an opportunity to participate in support of D-Day. He told us that on and around D-Day and the weeks leading up to it, they were just bombing rail yards and all over France and Germany to disrupt the supplying of German troops. So they bombed a lot in support of D-Day, not close air support. That would have been P-47 fighter bombers. But they bombed the interior of Europe and destroyed as many rail yards as they could. Of course, they would, rebuild them as fast as they could and come back and bomb them again.
When his plane was shot down, and for flak, it only takes one shot.
Right.
And you're down. That's
Right.
it. So, but was he injured at all?
No, he wasn't physically injured. He managed to bail out. The pilot was Tony Zatolo. I think he was from New Jersey, and they were flying the lead ship for that mission because they were taking all the experienced crews.
That's right. He was an experienced crew. Yeah.
He was a lead navigator and a lead bombardier, and they were the ones that the whole group would fly behind their mission.
Yeah.
But he had lost his airspeed indicator shortly after takeoff from Polbrook, England. And without an airspeed indicator, you can't properly navigate. So the second lead took command because they weren't able to navigate accurately without an airspeed indicator. They were flying behind the second lead then. Second lead took over. I don't recall what the mission was, but it was probably something like rail yards or distribution centers or things like that. But the second lead took over, and they dropped their bombs. They all dropped on the lead. When the lead would drop their bombs, the rest of the aircraft would drop their bombs as well, and that was their system. And then they'd make their turn to fly back to England, Polbrook in their case. Well, they flew into a cloud bank. There was a lot of clouds over Europe all the time there. It was then, is now. And they flew into a giant cloud bank.
Wow.
And they're flying and flying, just using dead reckoning. And after they come out of the cloud bank, after some period of time, traveling at 200 plus miles an hour, they come out of the cloud bank, and it was just him and his aircraft and the lead.
Oh my gosh.
Second leads, they were alone.
Where were the other aircraft?
They went someplace else. And since my father couldn't navigate other than dead reckoning because his airspeed indicator was out. And so they come out of the cloud bank and they're looking around and where is everybody? And so then he got into a heated argument by radio with the person who took over the lead. And he says, no, that's Liège. You see that in front of us? That is Liège. That is not Antwerp or whatever. The other one was arguing with him. No, it's Antwerp. We're supposed to go this way. My father said, no, that's Liège. I'm telling you, I know it. You see the river right there? That's the Scheldt estuary. And the other guy was arguing. Here they are flying alone, two B-17s. And as they're approaching, my father said, that's a flak battery right underneath it. No, you're wrong. And the second lead had his navigation wrong. And the next thing you know, it was like a couple of pigeons up there. And the flak just started coming up, firing on these two B-17s. All these batteries had nothing else to shoot at. They hit them in short order.
Yeah. And
the pilot of both aircraft hit the bailout klaxon, and everybody bailed out. My father says he recalls the plane exploding just a few seconds after he bailed out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank goodness he did. Yeah. Did everybody bail out okay?
As far as everybody made it out of his, and there were maybe 10 parachutes counted out of the other aircraft. So apparently everybody made it out. There was one savvy gunner who actually escaped upon bailing out because he waited. He was free falling and free falling until he could make out
Oh.
individual trees. Then he popped his chute at the last minute. The chute opened up and blossomed and laid him down on the ground, and the Belgian or Dutch underground grabbed him up and hit him in a
No.
basement. He actually made it back. One
Wow.
guy from my father's crew, an enlisted man, made it
Yeah.
back to England after a couple of months of moving him from basement to
Yeah, that's what
basement.
they do.
That's what
And then he can never fly again because he would be a huge target.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
But my father, never having jumped out of a plane before,
Perfectly.
he gets out, his plane explodes, and he pops his chute. Now
Yeah.
remember, he was 22 at the time.
That's so young to make those decisions.
22 years old and never jumped out of a plane. So he popped his chute, and he used to joke. He said, "Yeah, the Germans were waiting for him. No, I say he'll land in that field. No, I think he's going to land in this field over here." And they practically drove the car up and landed him in the backseat of this German military vehicle. And of course, the ones who speak English love to say, "For you, the war is over."
Wow.
And they took him to a center where
Yep.
they had they collected all the prisoners, and they sent him to Stalag Luft 1, where he was interrogated.
Because he was an officer.
Yeah, he was an officer, and they wanted to get as much information as they can about him. There's a great book called Nazi Interrogator. It's about a guy whose job it was to interrogate troops. He was German ethnically, but born and raised in South Africa, so he spoke perfect English.
Wow.
And he was recruited into the Luftwaffe to do the interrogation.
Wow.
So my father wasn't interrogated by this man, but it was the same system.
Yeah.
It was an analog computer, what they had. They had a huge room full of people typing information. What did you
Really?
have for breakfast? Well, we had spam and we had eggs, and where was your mission? And, people tried to resist, but what they did was they plugged in the information that they knew during the interrogation and intimidated all the prisoners and kept them separated from all the other prisoners. And they had, brutal looking guards to try to instill fear and intimidation when they went in to be interrogated. And so they collected little pieces of true information and put it together within an analog system to get all the information they could out of these files.
What was his greatest challenge as a prisoner of war?
That's a good one. I would say trying to keep weight on.
They had their food was.
Yeah, the German rations were iffy and a now and then kind of thing. What kept a lot of men going were the Red Cross package.
Yeah.
The Red Cross package was a marvel of thoughtfulness. Inside were raisins and checkers and pipe and tobacco and playing cards and liver pate. He remembers that, Sells liver pate. We always had it as kids because you could still buy it. It was a British product. I believe it was cow's liver and, heavily seasoned in garlic. And we thought it was savory and delicious. We put it on a cracker. But they lived on that. The German bread that they got was, 20% sawdust. The Germans weren't eating too good either.
No. Well, a lot of times the German guards were too old to serve, or they were injured and recovering.
Right.
So so they depended a lot on the officers, the Air Force officers, to run the camp.
Right.
And that made it so that the guards could be lazy.
Yeah.
I guess that's a good way to put it.
There were a lot of grandpas, a lot of old uncles.
Yeah.
The overall command structure after the Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3, they were under the overall command of the SS because Hitler was appalled that many could escape.
Yeah.
So they realized these were valuable prisoners, so they put them under the command of the SS.
Yeah.
But still, the guys down there, the ferrets, they had ferrets, which were younger German enlisted men who would sneak under the barracks and try to listen,
Yeah.
and who spoke English, would pick up snippets of conversation. They were called ferrets, and they had to maintain operational security to make sure that the Germans didn't learn too much about their plans. There was always, it was their duty to escape since they were officers. But
what did he do to while away the hours for 9 months?
that's a good one. There was a camp library.
Yeah.
He volunteered there. He loved to read. He was a big reader. There were art classes. My father was an amateur artist, so they would do sketches and drawings. They played sports. They had soccer, or football as the English called it. They organized sporting contests. They even did shows. They did theatrical.
Yeah, like little theater things.
They did little theater things too, with some of the younger, slimmer guys playing women in the parts, and so they tried to stay engaged.
They tried to keep each other's morale high.
They did.
Yeah.
They did. My father was the intelligence officer of his barracks, of his unit, his block. So they did try to organize escapes. My father once did try to get an escape going by digging through a latrine, of all things.
Oh.
And it was quickly discovered, and he was thrown into solitary for a short period of time, smelling like sewage. That was his only escape attempt. It was short-lived.
Did he ever say anything about what was the funniest thing that ever happened?
No.
I mean, in all the chaos and the starvation and everything, sometimes something funny happens, or
I'm sure that it did, but it was the watershed event of my father's life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the marches were just brutal.
Right.
And I think it was like -17 in
yeah,
Germany.
that first night, the march out of Stalag Luft 3, the commanding officer was a Colonel Spivey. He was a senior American officer in the camp, and all these young lieutenants and captains were listening to the Russian guns getting closer and closer, and then starting to see flashes on the horizon. I said, "We're gonna be liberated. This is wonderful." Spivey knew better. Colonel Spivey started saying, "Look, I want you guys to load up any pack you can put together with rocks and take turns marching around the complex. I want everybody to do a certain number of circuits." Because these are men who were not, in the top shape they were when they did their training. And Spivey knew what was going to happen. And he knew they weren't going to give him up. So they started for the last couple of weeks before they were that forced march out of Stalag Luft 3. Those last couple of weeks were filled with marching with, packs filled with rocks or dirt, just to get used to carrying stuff,
get their strength back,
strengthen their legs again. And he was part of that as well. You might know with your other interviews, men who have seen combat don't talk much.
Nope, they don't.
No.
Did your dad talk about it much?
Twice in his life. And both of them did not end well. He broke down when he tried to talk about it. The 2 times in his life he tried to talk about
it. It's something that you can't unfeel, unsee, or unimagine.
Yeah, the uncertainty, the suffering, the fear.
There was always the fear Hitler was going to always have him killed.
Yeah.
All he had to do was raise his hand and they'd all be dead.
Yeah.
That's what he did to the escapees of the Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Yeah, the Great Escape.
They shot them all.
They shot over 50 or almost 100 of them.
Yeah.
And that was a war crime.
Yeah.
So, you know, Dad didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And one time he did, but I was reading his diary. He had a handwritten diary, which I don't know who has it now. There's some documents that have been glommed up by other members of the family who shall remain nameless.
Yeah.
But perhaps they have it. But in any event, I started to read it, and we're all gathered around the backyard on a summer afternoon listening, and I'm reading. Stop! Stop! We all couldn't even look at him.
No.
We said, okay, sorry, Dad, sorry. You know, I was reading the description. We're all leaning in, and he just cried out, stop!
It's reliving it.
Yeah.
My dad never talked about it.
Yeah.
Ever. I mean, I've had to put pieces together, and
yeah.
His writings were cryptic. He wrote poems.
Oh.
And in his poems, he was saying something that was cryptic. I mean, you can't say the guard was mean to me, or the guards are the nicest. He had to say something like the guards are stupid, but he was meaning something else.
Right.
Because you never knew if they were going to confiscate their gear.
Their diaries. But he found his own way to express it.
That's it, yeah. And that's how I knew about the library. And your dad was an avid reader. And then after he was released, then he continued to read because he went on to prosper. My dad never read another book.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad went to Syracuse University, started in 1946, about the experience, being a POW's child, like yourself. My father was, I was always in awe of him. He was quiet. He was thoughtful. He could be funny, but usually he was very serious. My mother was one who was always singing, dancing, telling jokes. And my dad was kind of dark, and it's kind of brooding. And, you know, we all held him in awe.
You think that was slight PTSD?
He was diagnosed. He had a 30% disability due to PTSD. Duke University interviewed him when he moved to North Carolina. They asked for volunteers of men who've been diagnosed with PTSD. And most of them were from Vietnam, but there were several from World War II.
Yeah.
My father was the leader of his POW group in North Carolina. So he was the commander of the former POW group there. And so Duke interviewed him, and on film, kind of like this. And so, yeah, he was he suffered from PTSD.
Now, back to the marches. Did he say anything about his liberation?
Yes, he did, as a matter of fact. There was one picture that survived, which is probably with that
with the diary.
With the diary and the POW ID card. But they were in Stalag Luft VII-A, and they had those that had survived the march are all packed into this camp. And once again, Colonel Spivey, they heard, you know, artillery turning into small arms fire, and he said, "Look, everybody get down. Just everybody get down as low as you can. Wow. If you can go under, if you can dig a hole, get in it, because the shit is about to go down." Because they went out that morning, and all the old grandpas were gone. All the old uncles were gone, and they were replaced by 12 to 15-year-old Hitler youth. And wild-eyed, jacked up Hitler youth, and Colonel Spivey said, "Look, everybody just get down immediately." Wow. And they did. It was Patton's Third Army that overran, and Patton's Third Army came through the South the Bavaria, near where Mooseburg was, the camp. And everybody just covered up and covered themselves with whatever they could, and nobody stuck their head above 1 inch above the ground. And bullets were flying through these barracks that were made out of tar paper anyway, sticks and paper. Just bullets flying through. It was a short, sharp engagement with these Hitler Youth. And when they called the all clear, all the Hitler Youth were dead. There not one survived.
Wow.
And there were POWs that were wounded as well. Perhaps some dead, I don't know. General Patton made a big deal out of it, of course. He loved publicity. He had it staged with photographers inside the camp, and he came rolling in, sitting on top of the command post of a tank. And some photographers took a picture, and that's the picture that I saw. And if you glanced over it quick, they all looked like skulls because all their eye sockets were sunken and their cheeks were sunken. And he said, "All right, you boys did your job. Now I'm going on to Berlin and give that son of a bitch what he deserves." And everybody's, ah! And so my father had a friend of his who helped him survive the death march out of Stalag Luft 3, a big Swede from Utah.
Oh.
Sig Sigurdsson was his name.
Oh, my. And
Sig Sigurdsson traded some prisoner of war memorabilia for a 45, a 45 pistol.
Oh.
And so he got that pistol. He says, "Come on, Jack, let's get something to eat." And they go out into town. And they go right up into this farmhouse and just open up the door. And Sig could speak some rudimentary German. And he says, "Eigen," eggs. And they go, "Oh, no, Eigen, we don't have any eggs." And he pulls out the 45 and goes, "Eigen!" And eggs were coming out of everywhere. "How do you want them? You want them scrambled sunny side up? You want a souffle?" And they just ate their fill of these farmers' eggs and wiped their mouths and continued on.
Wow.
They filled their belly with fresh farm eggs. Shortly after that, they were transferred to Le Havre, France, and put on a ship.
Yeah.
And sailed back.
After the war, what did your dad do?
Oh, well, after the war, he wanted to be a journalist.
Okay.
So he went to journalism school at Syracuse University with so many other veterans, and he graduated cum laude from Syracuse University, degree in journalism. And then he started in advertising, and that's where he met my mother at BBDO, and he met her in 1948. Interesting thing was they both took diction lessons before they met because they didn't want to seem like ethnics from the outer boroughs, working class Irish.
Isn't that interesting?
And that's why I sound the way we do. This is the way we talked at the dinner table. Because my parents took diction lessons even before they met because they wanted to rise. And there were no Irish Catholics or very few in advertising. And they were. And so they both spoke, proper English. Whereas all my friends spoke like this: "Hey, you going to get the car tonight, or you got to take the dog for a walk?" Because we grew up in Metro New York, and that's how everybody talked. But at my dinner table, we all spoke, Hollywood style English of the time. And that's how they met.
Wow.
They met at BBDO. My mom was a junior account executive because they couldn't make a woman an account executive. But my mom was, the salutatorian of her school. She went to a Catholic school in Brooklyn. So she was one of the tops in her class, the top 2 or 3. They were both very, very bright people.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And now, how many siblings do you have?
I have an older brother, Chris, and I have a younger sister we call Mare. She's Mary Beth, but we all call her Mare. And that's it. So it was the 3 of us growing up in first Lower East Side of Manhattan. And then when I was a little kid, right when my sister was born, we moved out to Long Island. That was my home.
And then you have your children?
I have one child, Michael Downey Rowan. His grandfather on his mother's side was Michael Downey, and he was in the 82nd Airborne.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
And at the end of the war, he was the staff sergeant, and he was Eisenhower's personal guard.
Really?
Yeah. So he
Wow.
he had done a lot of jumps, a lot of combat jumps. He never talked about it at all, ever.
Wow.
I never got to meet him, but I wish I had.
Did your dad's service influence any of you?
Yeah, I would say it did. My brother went to the Naval Academy. He was class of 74 at Annapolis. And that same year he went into the Naval Academy, I joined the Marine Corps. Yeah, I would say that we have a military tradition that developed and started with my father and his siblings.
What influenced you to go into the Marine Corps?
Because when my brother was graduating from the Naval Academy, he decided to go Marines, which probably about 20% of the 15-20% of the Naval Academy grads do.
Oh.
And he did. And then so he went into the Marines. By God, that's good enough for me. And I enlisted.
I mean, the reason I ask is that's like the most dangerous branch.
Well, so they say, but in World War II, the highest casualty was
the Air Force. Yeah,
was the 8th Air Force of all the divisional units.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. My dad was my hero. It was hard to know. He was dark. He was brooding. But I know he loved me. And I certainly loved, admired, and respected him. I'll never forget him.
You were blessed to have a dad like that.
Yeah.
I hope that he lives on in your great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren.
Oh, thank you.
So that's why I'm doing this. I know he will.
I know.
In closing, I want to thank you so much for talking to me.
It's my pleasure.
About something so personal.
It's my pleasure.
So it means a lot to me. It means a lot to other veterans. And they all have a story to tell.
Yeah,
they all do. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for doing this, Diana. It keeps memories alive, and
it does.
It tells us all where we come from, all the sacrifices our forefathers have made, and will continue to make. Thank you very much.
If you are a veteran, or if you know someone who is, I urge you to share your story. Whether you fought in battle or worked behind the scenes, your experience matters. It's not just history, it's our history. It's a history we cannot afford to lose. At Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel, we are committed to preserving these stories, but we need your help. Subscribe to this podcast, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, if you have a story to tell, reach out to us on social media or email. Both are listed in our description. Every veteran story deserves to be heard, remembered, and honored. So join us in this journey. Together, we can ensure that the legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel live on. This is Diana Maul Halstead, the Kriege's daughter, signing off. Thank you for listening, and to all veterans, thank you from the bottom of my heart for your service and your sacrifice. If you would like to purchase a copy of my dad's memoir, Writings from the Barbed Wire Hotel, click the link in the description. In the back of almost 800 pages is an index of all the sources I used to research my dad's military career and time as a prisoner of war. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Let's spread the word and keep these stories alive. And remember, every story matters, especially yours. Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel was written by and produced by Diana Maul Halstead, the Kriege's daughter. Until next time, this is Legends of the Barbed Wire Hotel. Stay safe, stay strong, and never forget the sacrifices made for our freedom. Thanks for listening.